Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. Very, very selfishly, this is certainly the highlight for me, not just because I'm involved in it, but when we came up with some of the topics that we wanted to discuss at Mumbrella 360, this was one in the office that we got particularly excited about. In terms of future-facing media organisations looking for opportunities to connect brands with consumers. We obviously spend a fair bit of time not just looking at channels, but who are the, my father was a big horse racing fan, and I'd almost say if we were going to have a last dollar, where would we put our money on in terms of areas of massive growth over the next decade? I think if we look at Asia, and in some of the sessions we said earlier on that there is no such thing as a United States of Asia. There's a lot of very unique cultures that need to be preserved and not homogenized. But in terms of two big areas of content and communications that we saw that transcends borders, mixed martial arts or martial arts with the One Championship. And obviously it got referenced this morning a couple of times, particularly in Chad's presentation, around the rise of eSports. So again, particularly excited because we think these are areas of the business that will become a lot more front and center in our day-to-day interactions with brand marketers and when we're putting communication plans together. So why sports and why is it on the digital futures stage? Well, people love live events. People love competition and they love excitement. And increasingly sports and technology, not just in terms of how it's delivered and what qualifies as elite, but the importance of conditioning, mentoring, nutrition, to name but a few things, as well as the growth of the media platforms for millions to watch and thousands to participate in, is changing some of our media thinking. I'll get into it. In terms of welcoming to the stage, Kieran Davis on the far left. Kieran's the CEO and Managing Director of Here, There and Everywhere. He is, since his appointment, he's completely repositioned the company, even changing its name, from traditional publishing assets, so formerly was APN News and Media, but has very much radically changed it into a media and entertainment business focusing on growth sectors, including the newly launched eSports division that we'll touch on as we go through this discussion. Next to him we have Jack Lim, the Chief Commercial Officer for one of the largest sports property here in Asia, the One Championship. He's got a long history, many of you in the room will know him, background of building brands, growing businesses across media and tech. Prior to One Championship, was Chief Commercial Officer of MediaCorp here in Singapore. Prior to that, Sony Pictures. He's a media legend and luminary in the... and who would have thought he's only 23 years old? So given the scale of the businesses and what we'll touch on, I'm now referring to them as my billion-dollar men. But accompanying them on the stage as well, we have Mighty Mei Wei, former representative at the Olympic Games as a swimmer, and now One Championship fighter, successful fighter, won a last fight, got another fight coming up, which we'll touch on. And next Dennis Wee, not related, same spelling of surname, but a former professional gamer, winner of 4 World Cyber Games national titles here in Singapore, and now the co-founder and secretary of the Singapore Cyber Games and Online Gaming Association. So in terms of having top talent, completely understanding the nuances, the opportunities, and the audiences involved in martial arts and esports, we couldn't have asked for a better panel. So I thank you all for participating. We touch a lot on media is becoming increasingly difficult to reach audiences, whether that's as a result of technology allowing ad blocking, audiences getting older. But those hard to reach audiences for brands and advertisers, particularly that sweet spot of what we'd call millennials. It's something that eSports and the One Championship have very much got not just small audiences, but huge audiences across the region. And if you look at Kieran, if we start with you, if we look at the growth of esports, Dennis was saying outside, I think you were a professional player as far back as 2004.
Yeah.
You look at almost how it has crept up. It was more underground, in basements, very, very small but very tight-knit community, to now, if you start looking at the scale and the size of the opportunity, why and how did you, on behalf of HT&E, get involved in esports, given you were a traditional media business by background?
As a traditional media business in the newspaper business, we were used to losing audiences at a massive scale. In transitioning APNN and news and media away from traditional publishing, into radio and outdoor and other growth assets, we also looked at other areas that we needed to expand into. And the story for us in esports started for me about 18 months ago. I was at a broadcasting conference in Amsterdam. I had a Friday night free, and I was very well behaved. I could have gone wild in Amsterdam, but there was an esports tournament on in the Ajax football stadium that night, and I went along expecting nothing because I hadn't really been that aware of it up to then. There were 30,000 people in the stadium that night, cheering like it was a soccer game, and it was set up like as though there was a boxing ring in the middle of the stadium, and there was massive screens, and I thought, wow, this is extraordinary. And from there, our interest grew. And really what we've found is that we've decided that, in looking at the Australian market and the Asian market for esports, we've looked at, there's esports professional teams, there's events that are held, but there isn't any structure in place. And I think that's what esports is crying out for at the moment. And what we've done in Australia is we've partnered with a very good platform, which is important for us because we're not a technology company, in Gfinity. But we've also partnered with a company called Icon, who are based in the UK, who are experts at establishing franchise-based leagues. And what we're doing is tapping into the sporting ethos that is in Australia, the rivalry between cities, and setting up city-based franchises, teams. We'll have 8 initially launched in Australia. But it's incredible that over 2 days we did upfronts for advertisers and brands as to what we were doing, and we were blocked out the whole time. We had the top 45 brands in Australia coming along to find out how they get involved.
I was going to say, just on that, because we've got a couple of quick videos from both the One Championship as well as around esports. The fact that you were surprised when you were in Amsterdam to the size and the scale of what it is, I think, again, hopefully this session starts to open that up for some brands and marketers in the room, because if we touched on the $1 billion man. You look at, this is one of the One Championship events behind you. You look at the size and the scale and the energy of live sporting events. That anybody that is in the past familiar with a boxing match or in other markets a UFC or one, this is something that you'd be familiar with. I'll quickly play the video around the One Championships and then come back to the comparison with the esports. Can we play the video at the back with a bit of sound? Would be nice. A bit louder, maybe. Jack, just while it's playing in the background, how many events and in how many countries across Asia is One Championship doing this year? I know you said your travel schedule in the few weeks that you've been there has been unbelievable.
Sure. So we did 14 shows this year. So we just announced our 2018 calendar, and we'll do 24 next year. So that's one every 2 weeks.
So 24 live events, one every 2 weeks.
That's right.
From Cambodia to Singapore.
From Myanmar all the way to Tokyo, Shanghai, Beijing, and so on.
So again, a truly international, truly Asian.
That's right, truly Pan-Asian.
And so, just while it's playing around, some of the challenges that Kieran mentioned in terms of esports, because it has grown up in many different places over a long period of time, Dennis, almost the fragmented nature of how it has grown up versus, which could lead on to some challenges in terms of how it gets scaled consistently as a franchise and competing franchises. The way in which Shatri, when he set up One Championship, having observed that in many other sports and some of the challenges that has from talent recruitment, from commercial deals, from just the reputation of the sport, it's fair to say that the One Championship is fairly unique in the sense that it is owned, as the Americans would say, soup to nuts from start to finish. Was that a very deliberate strategy so that you're in much greater control of the sport? Because a lot of sports can, and we'll touch on some a bit later, how they go slightly wayward, where you can have rogue elements, but there's complete control of the One Championship. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Chatri's our founder and chairman, and I think he has such clarity of vision with regards to the brand, and certainly has a very, very keen sense of how we execute to bringing that brand vision to life. So to your point, the short answer is yes. We're a very values-based sort of organization, and that set of core values guides and informs a lot of the decisions that we make, and having it soup to nuts allows us to actually do just that.
And May, from a fighter's perspective, is that something that's appealing for you as to being part of that One Championship family?
I think One Championship is really unique, and I decided to sign on because I see how they really take care of the image of sport. You know, like sometimes martial arts and sport, it gets jived with entertainment, and sometimes it just goes way out of line in some situations, which maybe Jack can elaborate. And I think One Championship really take pains to keep us within the right boundaries and advocate good values and good Asian values, and that's why I decided to sign on. And I agree.
Just quickly, the members of the audience, who's been to a live One Championship or similar boxing or UFC style event? Who's watched them, on broadcast? So again, cool. So excellent. That's keeping the team very happy up here. So in terms of the excitement, the razzmatazz around the events, all of that in terms of the video probably isn't that surprising to you. When we looked at the image of one of the One Championship events, huge live audience, ridiculous amounts of effort that goes into working with the venues and getting it to the quality that you guys need it. Just by way of comparison, you look at this image, which isn't a fight, it is gamers. It's the League of Legends World Championships that took place in Seoul earlier this year. 40,000 people, live event, watching gamers do what they do best. 40,000 seater venue that's sold out literally in minutes. Again, the images look very, very similar. Clearly, what goes on in terms of the sport is very different, but the excitement and the engagement of the fans is absolutely palpable.
But sorry to interrupt you, Leo. At the risk of sort of landing the first punch in your face at the moment, I think it's important to understand that eSports, is so much more than just a live event. Because the live event, if you like, is the culmination of weeks of online gaming, and when you consider that it's in the short space of time, it's come to about 600 million eSport players around the world, tens and tens and tens of millions live streaming events like that, events happening every week that are not in the public domain, unstructured, yes. But there's just such a growing population and involvement across eSports that is not documented yet. And I think what we see in pictures like this is the culmination, if you like, of where brands thinks it goes. But there's so much more can be done with eSports. And that's why we find it so exciting, because the knock-on effect in terms of pay-per-view or gambling or in-brand with VR and in-brand product placement, in-stream revenue generation, there's so many streams of revenue for us going forward that if we can get a bit of structure right, and I think this is where Asia can lead the market, because Asia has led esports development around the world so far, that if we can get the structure right, get the domestic leagues going correctly and governed correctly into a regional league, into a global league, then I think that the world's our oyster for e-gamers, but also for brands.
I just want to quickly play the video for esports. Who in the room has heard of Dota 2? Okay. Oh wow, that's actually more than I would have anticipated. For those that haven't, and I hadn't until about 3 weeks ago before starting to research this, multiplayer game stands for Defense of the Ancients. If we can play the video with a bit of the sound, it will bring the rest of us slightly up to date. So, hold on, come back to that. Oh, where's the video gone? Maybe the video.
It is time to begin
With a bit of
the
sound.
International. It is the biggest and the 7th installment of the International, where Dota fans, Dota players...
The battle begins.
In the history of the International to whitewash the grand final. 3-0 victory over Nubi.
They have been absolutely fantastic over the last few days. Liquid, they were so close to elimination like 2 or 3 times in a row. And every single time they overcame it. And today they just looked like just flat out the best team in the world. This series, it's not only a 3-0, it was pretty convincing wins for the most part. Just a clearly better team. Big congratulations.
Oh my God, what an incredible TI this was. We hope you had a blast, and we hope to see you next year. Until then, play some Dota 2.
So Kieran, for some of us of a certain age who used to go and play football in the park after school, and I think the last video game that I played was GoldenEye on the N64, the Nintendo 64 in about 1998. It's an entirely new world, and it is very much of a new generation. That, again, certainly in the same way as when I first got into digital, trying to explain, putting banners and buttons on websites, being part of a media marketing mix, because it's what consumers do, and it's our job to observe what consumers are doing and then look to find them in the right places at the right time. Do you think that the fact that a lot of marketers aren't of the generation that are doing this, that fills you with hope or frustration in terms of the opportunities from a commercial perspective?
Oh, it fills me absolutely with hope, and I think I'm lucky enough to have worked in radio, and we've brought out artists like Justin Bieber or Pink or Lady Gaga, and I'd bring home tickets to the kids, and they wouldn't want to know. But when I told them we were getting into esports, my 12-year-old son, he was able to name all the YouTubers who play the games, and I think the challenge is for brands to understand that if they're going to get involved in esports, authenticity is critical. That if the community of esports and e-gamers think that a brand is coming in to commercialize their community, they'll be dead. And that's why you've got to start at grassroots level. You've got to be prepared for mistakes, because mistakes are going to happen. But if you can work with the community of e-gamers, develop the industry so that it's more commercial, but that it still has its, as they see it, integrity, that is really, really important. And brands that don't do that are going to suffer big time.
And is part of that, and again, I know it's a bit of an exclusive, we're just putting up the names and the logos of the city-based structure that you're employing. How important is community and galvanizing around team heroes, national heroes, and again, this very much applies to One Championship and to you, Dennis, in terms of how people gravitate towards becoming a fanatic as opposed to simply a fan. Because certainly my observation has been the fan bases of both eSports and One Championship are absolutely fanatical. And in terms of the hero worship and role model status that we'll touch on in a little while, that this type of structure is necessary to fuel that?
Yeah, it's necessary to bring it into the mainstream, because this type of structure means that brands who are getting involved, they know the commercial packages, they know the KPIs that we're going to deliver in terms of audiences, they know when events are going to happen, because at the moment, eSport tournaments tend to be a little bit haphazard, there's no set date. So all those critical things for a brand to know before it enters into a sponsorship, we've got to establish here. And it's bringing eSports into the mainstream in terms of commercially, having a commercial head on how to produce returns for brands. And that's not there yet, but that's something that we're working on. I think if we can establish this in Australia, we're seeing this as the model across Asia as well, because that sort of regional competitive nature obviously exists here as well. And then you move it into a more international scale. That will hire the prize money as well. It's really important that mainstream comes into these sports really quickly.
And Jack, how important is homegrown heroes such as May to the current success and the future success of One Championship?
It is everything. The two biggest stakeholders for us, the two most important communities for us are our athletes and our fans. And the reason why this has gathered so much momentum is because martial arts is very much a cultural treasure in Asia, probably one of the biggest, if not the biggest. And you find it so deeply rooted in tradition across every single market, whether it's Jiu-Jitsu in Japan, Taekwondo in Korea, Muay Thai in Thailand, and you can go on and on and on. And One Championship really is that home of martial arts in Asia, and we're really not just about the fight and the sport, but about the discovery and at the same time the celebration of Asian heroes. You know, somebody like May is our idea of a heroine and a great role model. You know, she's multiple times SEA Games champion, Singapore Olympian. And yet, you know, she's humble, she's kind, you know, she's the sort of a role model that we want, because she's the sort of a role model that inspires youth across the region. Our guy in the Philippines, our world champion, Edward Fulayong, and I'll be watching him fight this Friday night, fought his way through life. You know, he overcome massive adversity. He came from a really extreme poverty. He was in a family of 9 siblings, 4 died from malnutrition. He fought to sort of earn money to put himself through university and supported the other siblings. Today when he fights, the whole country stops to watch. And yet he's gentle, he's kind, he gives back to the community, he's back in his village helping out kids and disenfranchised youth. How do you not root for a guy like that? You know, how do you not root for heroes like that? Yeah. So they are everything that we do.
I mean, there's the building of communities, there is the passion and the excitement. Just on the money side of things, obviously commerciality, you're in the business of being in a business. In the old media adage of, you know, you get the eyeballs, then the money follows. We'll touch on the commerciality of the wider business, but just by way of a bit of comparison. So Stan Wawrinka, when he won the US Open last year, got paid winner's check, $3.5 million. Dustin Johnson, I think it was just under 1.8. Tom Brady, under 200 grand for winning the Super Bowl. The entire German football team, when they won the Soccer World Cup, 7 million split across the team of 25, 26 people. Mentioned Dota 2 as part of the video and the winning team going on stage. The 5 individuals that we saw in that video shared a prize of $24 million, 2.4 million apiece. Absolutely blew my mind when I saw that. my son's 4th birthday is next week. I will be training him up as a. He'll also get into the One Championship, but he will.
Well, he hasn't got your football genes anyway.
So one by, and again, Dennis, just want to touch on this. So one by, again, I'd never heard of Team Liquid, based out of the Netherlands, but a multi-nationality team.
That's right.
There's over 60 players and coaches as part of that setup. They play games other than Dota 2, and I've listed those there because obviously as a professional player, you have certain games that you are better at than others. Certain games have individual players, some are team players. So just looking at that as a concept seems quite alien, but for you, this is what you live and breathe.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is something that I've been familiar with for the last 10 years. Yeah.
And in terms of this as a model is the way of the future for esports teams. There will be more of the likes of Team Liquid growing as part of your remit here in Singapore, working with the government to grow esports, not just here, but as part of the wider Smarter Nation for Singapore of being part of these multi-market teams as well?
Absolutely. I think in the next couple of years, we would definitely see a lot more professional teams stepping up. In the recent, I think, news in Singapore, we have a few teams coming up, offering medical benefits, team benefits, and they're all full-time players, and they're training hard, to qualify for international tournaments all over the world. Yeah.
With one of the commercial points that I thought interesting, the Team Liquid is now been acquired by a business called Axiomatic. Again, hadn't heard of it until 3 weeks ago, but it's a sports marketing and media business out of the States that some of the investors and shareholders in it are Magic Johnson, the former basketball player, Tony Robbins, he of positive speaking at conferences all around the world, and also the former CEO of Mattel, but he was also the former CEO of Sony PlayStation. So again, in terms of where we look at the overlap of where sports, entertainment and technology are starting to go, when you've got people with that type of track record and that type of investment getting involved, it becomes really interesting where sports starts and where entertainment franchises potentially stops. And again, saw quite recently that Axiomatic have just been announced as one of the companies that the Walt Disney Company are putting into their incubator program, whereby they'll help to look to create new business models in the future. So again, if we think of the way in which, and that's just Team Liquid, if we think that that's happening in different pockets around the world, to Kieran's point earlier, again, I put it to the panel, it's probably an if, because of commercial self-interest at some point, whether leagues merge, whether franchises fold into each other or get bought out, it's going to be a really interesting journey.
It is, and I think where you've got I think it's about 30 of the top European soccer teams are now establishing esports franchises or teams. You've got AFL in Australia are investing 20-odd million into building their esports position. You've got the AFL, you've got the American basketball. So a lot of teams getting into it because they are struggling to engage with younger audiences. And back to my point about authenticity, if they're doing it to try and keep their own codes alive, they're doing it for absolutely the wrong reasons. Because this is about building up a new sporting paradigm, if you like. So teams that are investing a lot of money as Paris Saint-Germain or Manchester City or whoever, if they're doing it to maintain relevance of their own sporting codes, they're going about it the wrong way, and they may as well be throwing money out the door.
And do you envisage across Asia that in the same way as the Manchester Cities and the Paris Saint-Germain and some of the US NFL and NBA teams are creating their own esports franchises, that you'd envisage that's conversations that you'll be having in Australasia as well as Asia?
Yeah, absolutely, and we're having them already, and it's with brands and individuals and teams that nobody in this room has ever heard of. But I guarantee you in 5 years' time they will be just as well known as a Manchester City or a Chelsea or an Arsenal or a Liverpool or a San Francisco 49ers.
Now, the way in which a franchise or a sport can be, brand stretched into different areas, there are certain games that are now becoming movie franchises. I mean, I ended up watching it at about midnight last night. Assassin's Creed being the off the top of the head example of that. But some of the scale of the games, particularly coming out of China, such as New Ghost Mobile, which we got the image of behind. NetEase, the publisher and creator of that, have done a deal with this couple, who are also in a particularly big movie. They're also the celebrity spokespeople of the game. So again, it's not just about the game in and of itself, it's how you promote it wider than that. And this has been around for a long time, in the same way as Disney movies and Hasbro toys you get as part of your Happy Meal with a McDonald's. But given the scale of the numbers, and something like the KPL, which is the Honor of Kings franchise, again, some of the numbers for the audience there in the background of 54 million daily active users through competitions. You see the scale of the opportunity, but do you see opportunities for not just the teams like a Team Liquid, but for the publishers of games to embrace wider brand integration, brand sponsorships? One of the key characters in the Chinese version, the prince on the left, is actually being replaced as the game goes to the Western world as part of a deal with DC, so Batman's actually going to be introduced into the game. Do you see that these are all opportunities for both the teams like Team Liquid, but also for the games to actually stretch to be truly Asian in their flavour, not just specific to particular markets?
Oh yeah, it's absolutely, it's a simple answer. But if you look at new technologies in virtual reality, augmented reality, where that can go and how people can be immersed into a game themselves, or immersed in a game and a movie, with product placement that goes on there, and the brand extensions that go beyond that. It's remember that eSports is a native digital activity sport in its own right. It's not a sport that is looking to move and migrate into a digital world. So it has got an awful lot of advantages already set up for itself in terms of how it's run, how it's played, where it can go. It's learning a lot and making a lot of mistakes, yes, but it's not faced with the challenges that say some of the more traditional sports like soccer or AFL are facing, because it already operates in a digital world, and that's how we're going to be in 5-10 years' time anyway.
And Jack, from your perspective, whilst obviously the One Championship is live, it's an event that involves human beings, even though Dennis is a human being.
Dennis is human.
It's not playing the virtual games per se. How important is, because you've obviously got huge broadcast rights deals to cover the events, the content that you get from your different channels around training regimes, which we'll touch on, but almost the behind the scenes, getting to learn the people behind the sport and in the sport. How important is digital as a channel for reaching your consumers, given the huge video views of One Championship, almost hockey sticking?
Yeah, I think hugely important. The live experience is great, but it's just one of the many consumer touch points that we have. As you correctly mentioned, we're in 120 countries now on our broadcast footprint. We go out to about 1 billion households, potentially around the world. But digitally, our touch points have also grown exponentially. We went from about 300 million video views just 3 years ago to about 1.5 billion this year. We're adding 100,000 Facebook fans every week as we speak. So essentially, these platforms all matter. I think it makes up for the immersive and complete consumer and fan experience. And ultimately, we'll go to a platform if it makes sense for us by way of showcasing our athletes and helping us discover local Asian heroes, as well as if it allows us to continue to better and deepen that fan engagement.
Can I just jump into that? And not to I think the One Championship have done a phenomenal job. You just mentioned 1.5 billion video views, which is amazing. But most of the people in this audience are probably amazed at some of the figures that esports has come through. Last year there was 6.5 billion video views for esports. So it's 6 times the size of one championship, which is incredibly successful. And it's something that most people in this room just don't have an idea of the underground nature, if you like, but the extent of how popular this already is.
Given the wider tentacles of how both businesses and codes could go, given we've got an image here from Kingdom of Champions, Jack.
Yep.
Just showing the fan engagement, the fanaticism, if you will. We touched on earlier the fact that because you own every aspect of the One Championship, do you almost see opportunities for esports and One Championship to almost do you envisage yourself as part of a gaming franchise, and can you imagine that we'll be channeling our inner May and fighting in an esports tournament, pretending to be you? In all seriousness, is that something that you guys see as part of the future of One Sports beyond the beauty of the martial arts and the live events?
I think, as I said, we'll go wherever it makes sense to our fans, and we get asked that a lot. We get asked about our foray into esports. We get asked about protein shakes and sportswear and gym shoes and all kinds of stuff. We're just very careful with how we curate our brand, and at the end of the day, we will remain guided by our core values. And as I said, everything that we do has to make sense to our athlete community, which continues to grow across Asia, and at the same time to our fan base. But we realize that the brand has become extremely mainstream. We're about 80% millennial across the fan base, and 40% female. So it says a lot about perceptions or misperceptions about what the sport may be, or what some of the other promotions around the world may represent or misrepresent.
With again, we have some nice images of you, May, behind you.
That's you.
You obviously had your debut match last August in Kuala Lumpur and won, so congratulations. You've got an upcoming match in a few weeks' time at the Immortal Pursuit event here in Singapore. How are you feeling?
Feeling great. Emotionally, mentally, I'm in a really good place. Physically, I'm a little bit beat up. We're still 16 days out from my fight, so obviously now my body's just going, can we just fight and get done with the training? But yeah, I'm feeling really good.
Hopefully V, your opponent, will feel a lot more beat up than you do in 3 weeks' time. But in terms of the training that you go through, the fact that you represented your country at the Barcelona Olympics as a swimmer, and are now putting your body and the mental pressure of training to be at the very elite level. Can you just give us an idea of what your sort of training's like on a particularly in the run into the fight? I know that probably turns it up a bit, but
okay. If I have a fight coming up, I usually have a 6 or 7 week fight camp, which means it's really intensive and the training is geared very specifically towards the type of opponent I'm going to have. So when the opponent's named, then my coaches will come in, sit down with me, we'll do the strategy, and then we'll train according to that strategy. So 6 to 7 weeks is usually pretty good for me. So a typical week for me would look like I would have 11 sessions a week. Not every session's hard and I'm banging it out with my sparring partners. It's not like that. There's a lot of skill training, technical work going on, then sometimes we have sparring sessions. But in between training sessions, that's where a lot of the stuff happens too, like physiotherapy, getting injuries treated, massage, nutrition, I get my blood work done and make sure that nothing's missing and things like that. It's the best way to tell. You can't go on, I think I'm missing this. No, the best way to do your blood panel and you know what's happening with you. So there is a lot of work. It's full time. Because if you're training 2 or 3 hours in the morning and going back in the evening to do another 2 hours, in between you have a 2-hour physiotherapy session, that's a full work day.
And then you get asked to speak at Umbrella.
Yeah, and then I get a jet back to the gym again, so it's like that. It's like this for 6 or 7 weeks. And then of course through that, it's not just the the physical tolls that your body goes through. It's also the emotional and the mental, and then it gets even better when you have to start dieting a little bit to make weight. So we're 2 weeks out. I'm still eating carbs. Good thing this is not next week, because then I'll be really cranky. I won't be able to eat carbs, and you guys, I wouldn't be smiling.
And Dennis, speaking of eating carbs, as a former top gamer yourself, and now having to deal with them on a daily basis, given what May's just said, obviously, the physical intensity of the training around being a one championship elite athlete is somewhat, clearly very different to being an elite gamer. But in terms of, I've got a bit of an image of one of the guys up there, but in terms of what are the attributes that make a professional esports gamer, the people that you're working with now, that literally, as with all elite sports, it's about not just being good, it's the tiny percentages that make the elite that can then go on to win those types of championships. What's the training like? What's the mental aptitude like of a professional esports player?
So I think if you look at around the world, and not just Singapore, a lot of the teams are now investing very heavily in the physical aspects of training, the mental aspects of training. Teams like Team Liquid have their own in-house trainers. They have dietitians to look after them. One of the top Counter-Strike teams in the world actually won a global tournament because they had a psychologist to actually motivate them and get them mentally prepared, for all these mentally demanding tournaments on the world stage. So I think at the elite level, at the top level, you're looking at every little bit of advantage you can get, and it's not just about your in-game skills. That at the top level, would be kind of plateaus out for the rest of the teams. But what kind of advantages can you actually get, outside of the game to give you that additional edge to last, 5 games, 7 game sets, each game set lasting between 45 minutes to an hour. So it's very, I think, demanding mentally in terms of that stamina. And we strongly believe, for Skoga, that a healthy mind, is a healthy body. And you want that balance to give you that edge, to win that championship.
It's interesting. Healthy mind leading to healthy body, almost with one championship, healthy body leading to healthy mind. And it's, again, interesting similarities, even though it's from a different perspective. I know we're running out of time. Want to get some questions. Jack, earlier this year, Chatri said that should Conor McGregor have been a free agent, that he wouldn't necessarily have wanted him as part of the One Championship. Obviously, the amount of worldwide attention around the Irish fella is huge. Can you just explain why, philosophically, Conor wouldn't necessarily align with the values of One Championship?
It goes back to our core values, as I mentioned, and it goes back to how these values sort of guide and inform us as a brand. It's the same values that we instill in our athletes and everybody who sort of works on the team. It appeals to an Asian audience, but I don't think good manners and good values are exclusive to Asian audiences. I think they're very universal. In many ways, I think that has been one of the reasons why the appeal for the One Championship brand has been so broad, both with millennials and across multiple segments of society. A lot of our athletes are also seen as role models. Every time somebody goes into a country and discovers an Asian hero and he or she wins a world championship, it ignites dreams. It helps kids, it helps young people realize that they can dream about being the best they can be. And it's not about being a fighter necessarily, it's about being the best teacher or the best doctor. It's about dreaming and being who you want to be and what you want to be. And we don't want our role models throwing water balls at each other, mouthing off at press conferences, talking about your family and mine, not so polite fashion. I think we will continue to stay very true to those values.
And you mentioned Edward earlier on in terms of coming from background of poverty, but rising so high. May, how much do you take on the personal responsibility that role model status? Because again, we talked earlier, nation's hopes on your shoulders when you go to an Olympic Games is a huge honour and responsibility. The fact that you are, breaking the glass ceiling. I did ask May whether I was allowed to say this earlier on, but the fact that May competed in the Barcelona Olympics, just turned 41 and just had her first fight in the One Championship, I think, in terms of inspiration of people breaking all the rules and inspiring others to do the same in a positive way. How much responsibility do you take on yourself for that?
When I was younger and I was swimming for Singapore and went to the Olympics and all of that, and I was constantly in the eye of, under the spotlight, and that was really hard when I was younger, having that sense of responsibility as a role model. When you're 16, you just want to be a kid. But as I got out of it, I got a little bit older, and you mature, and you kind of see how people are growing up, society, and the limitations they put on themselves sometimes is astonishing. And it starts with the mental limitations, all right? And then that transcends through everything in life and what you're going to do or what you think you can achieve or cannot achieve. So when the opportunity came for me to compete in MMA and then with One Championship, I wanted to send this message out. I'm a game changer. I like people to know that you can't give yourself that death sentence mentally. Just because you've turned a certain age doesn't mean you can't do this anymore. You have to be open to what your potential is, and MMA and One Championship has given me that platform to walk the talk, really. At 41, I'm fighting, and I'm going to fight again in 2 weeks, and I think it's going to be fun. I'm not saying, you just step out, be like, yeah, I think I can do this. Not really. There's a certain, responsibility, what I do with my body, how I've taken care of it. All through the years, I've been very, very consistent. It's kind of like taking care of a sports car. You take care of it, and it's going to perform for you. And most people don't understand that, and they think that, just because I've hit a certain age. But if you've been doing the due diligence and just taking care of yourself, whether that's physically, mentally, emotionally, then those limits start to disappear. And that's what I've done for myself, and I hope people can start eliminating those mental barriers and start evolving faster.
I'm going to quickly click on, because I know that we've got running out of time, but again, that positivity around martial arts making the world a better place and the role models within one, demonstrating that, I think is at the heart of the brand proposition, and therefore, again, brands seek safe environments, not frenetic, potentially risky environments, which why it's interesting from a commercial perspective, certainly in discussions I'm having with clients. But I just want to focus very quickly on 2024. It's a big chart up there with the latest UN population statistics. The reason why it goes up to 2024 is because that's when India is due to overtake China as the world's most populous nation. It also struck me, Jack, that when I was researching One Championship, you guys have just taken some investment from Sequoia India.
That's right.
So how important do you see India as part of the future of One Championship?
I think India's got, in itself as a country and a culture, a very rich tradition around martial arts. We know there's a huge fan base there that's demanding that we enter the market. We also have shareholders or a shareholding that is very connected and knowledgeable in the Indian subcontinent. So it's definitely on the radar.
And Dennis, I know that, again, there's different stats around internet takeoff in India, that across this 7-year period, the infrastructure and the ability for e-gaming to truly take off in India, it's going to be it's not just China. Yeah. It's going to be a big part of the future.
Certainly. I mean, we know for a fact that I think there is a growing community in India who are very competitive. One of the teams in Singapore, they actually have a kind of a franchise spin-off in India as well, and for an all-girls team. Yeah. So I think that's where things are going to get interesting when infrastructure starts to improve. More people can access, good computers, mobile devices, you're going to see a lot more competition, I think for esports in India itself.
Excellent. The other reason why I mentioned 2024, it's obviously the Paris Olympic Games. Thomas Bach, the IOC president, they're, in terms of appealing to millennials, they're looking at introducing new sports for new generations. So, they're, at the Tokyo Games, 3-on-3 basketball and BMX freestyle are being introduced. They're looking at introducing esports as a potential sport into 2024. But Thomas Bach said, the physical activity as to whether it makes esports participants sportsmen and therefore a sport. Kieran, very quickly, how important is Olympic credibility to esports?
And everyone will have to answer in
I'll
one sentence or less.
That question a little bit and say, I think esports credibility is much more important to the Olympics than the Olympics is to esports, because it's, you look at the challenge of getting esports in the mainstream is there. The Olympics would do that, but I don't think esports is going to exist and will grow and will blossom, whether or not it's in the Olympics or not.
Yeah. Okay. And clearly, one championship will continue to grow and flourish along the trajectory that it's already been on.
That's right. We're just getting started, man.
So on that basis, given that Mr. Burrows is giving me the chivvy up, thank you all for your attention and your time. I don't know about you, but I call that a tie because we firmly believe that both the One Championship and esports have got huge futures, and we're looking forward to working with both organisations to drive it forward. Thank you very much.